everyone. This is Kathy Mason from MasonWorks Marketing here on Conscious Business Zone with my new friend, Kim Penberthy. I hope I said that right. And Kim is an amazing, source for information and clinical research on many things of the unseen worlds and the extraordinary out-of-body, mind-body connection. She's the Chester F. Carlson Professor of Psychiatry and Neurobehavioral Sciences at the University of Virginia School of Medicine, which is part of the Division of Perceptual Studies, which I want to hear all about. And I'm so excited because she's a leadership in so many areas. She's interested in near-death experiences, out-of-body experience, after-death communications, but she's also the president of the Society for Clinical Psychology, and she's a former chair of the American Psychological Association for Clinical Psychology Diversity Committee, and a fellow in the APA Leadership Institute for Women in Psychology. Wow. And an author. So welcome, Kim. I can't wait to hear and learn more about what you know that we want to know. So
Thank you, Kathy. And it's, you said the name correctly. It's Penberthy. It's a good Cornish name. So if you're from the UK, you would recognize it right away. Yeah.
Good. I always get intimidated by last names. It seems like I don't mess up the first name, but that is the hardest job about doing this show.
I'm sure. Oh, believe me. Yeah.
Yes. So Kim, tell us a little bit about your journey, because you must have had some experience that got your curiosity going to make you dive deep into all of this. Do you want to share a little bit with us?
Absolutely. So I will first say I am a clinical psychologist, as you've mentioned, Kathy, and I started my career really looking at how to help people. This sort of concern that most young people have when they go to college and graduate school and go into psychology. And it has been all along informed by some of the unique experiences that I had as a young person, which sort of opened my eyes to this idea that we in the scientific world might not know everything that's out there. And I will give an example of my parents, and really I have to, in all honesty, thank them for creating a crucible for me to grow up in that really promoted a strong foot in science, and one also in sort of this understanding of what's beyond science and the supernatural. And a real quick example was, as a child, I was very curious, asking questions all the time of my mother and father. My father was a cardiothoracic surgeon, very, very grounded in science. My mother was a nurse, and she had worked a lot with dying patients, and she probably would have been a Wiccan if she knew what that was. She loved the earth. We were very connected, living on a farm to the earth. Anyway, I asked them both some pretty challenging questions as a child. I asked them separately. I asked my father, in my curiosity, what is the purpose of life? and you know, without a drop in a beat, he answered. He said, well, that's easy. And I said, really? This is great. He said, yeah, it's to reproduce.
Oh my gosh.
So that was a very scientific, you know, and that's what life does. That's our purpose when we're, you know. I asked the same question of my mother. And again, she surprised me by saying, oh, that's easy. And she said, it's love. So growing up, I had these concepts that both were true. It was both and. I, of course, as you can imagine, also asked about the other end of spectrum, and later on asked my father, well, what happens when you die? And he said, well, that's very easy. And he proceeded to explain to me, the decomposition of the body and all of that scientifically, probably more than I needed to know at that age. So I had that understanding. The body dies, and here's what happens. I asked my mother the same question. What happens when we die? Where do we go? And she said, again, it's easy. We return to love. This was her concept, which I took and made my own, as we return to this consciousness of love, which is all that exists. You can call it God, the creator, the universe. It has many different names. And so from an early age, I was able to hold that both of these could be true. Two people I considered authorities, intelligent, loving people who wanted me, would never lie to me. I got very different answers, and I incorporated both of them. And so in my clinical psychology studies, I did what may be called traditional mainstream work, focusing in developing treatments for people with chronic depression, with addiction problems. These usually were co-occurring in the populations I worked with. Later in my career, I was fortunate enough to begin to work with oncology patients in the cancer center at the university, and have worked for many years with people who are dying, their family members, and really helping them approach death in the most constructive way that they can. And I've published in very mainstream areas with respect to these sorts of things, a book on persistent depressive disorders, that sort of thing. I also noticed in my work that contemplative practices were incredibly important. And I began incorporating more mindfulness-based interventions, studying meditation and these altered states of consciousness. And about a little over a decade ago, got involved with the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia. And this is an organization that is embedded in the School of Medicine at the University of Virginia and has been around over 50 years. It was started in 1967, I believe, by Dr. Ian Stevenson, who was the chair at the time. And that's the location where I do most of my research now, and have found that having a foot in both worlds has been really advantageous, because I can crosstalk, if you will. And the most recent book I wrote with my daughter, who's 27, is an example of how we sort of bridge that, the sort of what might be called mainstream science of psychology and contemplative practices and these other areas, so that maybe a reader who might not pick up a book on near-death experiences, they might pick up my book.
Right.
And be exposed to some of that, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. Well, I think what we're coming into right now is a reuniting of spirituality and science. And that's what you're talking about. You're a bridge to both worlds. And do you find that that it's been hard to, I mean, you said you worked with oncology cancer patients. Was it hard with your compassion to work, or could you keep your scientific mind on everything?
I think, it's an interesting question, and I see that asked a lot of people who work with cancer patients. And I will say that I think I am able to do that work and have done it for so long, because I know that what I can offer is help. And I cannot eliminate the fact that they have cancer. And often the people I work with are actively dying. And yet I can help them approach that, and their families approach that in a way that is going to be not as miserable, I'll say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, as we, anyone who's, lived through the death of someone they know or love knows that it's a journey, and people can have a good death or a very bad death. And I really am working in that case with people, and in my writings to really help people have what we would call a good death.
I understand. Well, so I'm just fascinated with all the research that you've done. You're involved in an international level conducting research and consulting with the Center for Consciousness Research, which sounds fascinating, and the Scientific and Medical Network, as well as IANDS. Could you talk a little bit about the connecting of these? I mean, are you seeing, I'm curious how IANDS stacks up anyway, but because I've been a volunteer for 6 years.
Yeah.
But I'm curious about how how traditional or how clinical, I guess I would say,
Yeah.
in the research that each one of them are, or if there's a lot of difference. And the next question is about being a woman doing all of this, if it's highly dominated by men, or if there's a lot of us doing.
Right. Yeah. So I think it's a really good question. I am part of organizations that are, as you say, increasingly sort of looking at this idea of spirituality and clinical psychology and mental health. And IANDS is right up there with some of the best doing, work that is really meaningful. And answering that question, I pose every time I look at research. I look at the "so what" question. So we might find that things are happening. We may be able to document it. Like I research after death communications, and we can collect data about it, talk about the frequency, what kind they are, all of these things. And I also really feel that it's important to say, how does this affect people? The same with near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, any kind of mystical experience. It is important to accumulate knowledge about it. And yet, for me as a clinician, as a human, I feel it's also important to say, how does that impact us? How does this change things? Do people feel better? Are they able to grieve their loved one? Are they able to move on with their life? That sort of thing. And that's where I see, my clinical work and the personal stories I hear really tying to the research. And I think I have found the research to be strong in all of these organizations. Obviously, some of them are like IANDS invested in research and the personal stories, which I think is a really beautiful combination. I will have to say, in other organizations I'm part of Division 36, which is religion and spirituality in psychology. It's part of the American Psychological Association. And they're putting out more information about this and publishing more in this arena, even on after-death communication, on the importance of clinicians to understand how to work with spirituality. The idea that as clinicians, when someone discloses to us about an after-death communication or a near-death experience, we need to be trained on how to receive that and what to do with that therapeutically. And more, that is happening, which is so exciting for me to see.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Well, I've been lucky enough to interview Peter Panagore,
Okay.
Reverend Peter Panagore, several times, and he says that there's going to be a huge mystical awakening and he got this from someone, a German philosopher or mystic,
Mm-hmm.
that said that all of the people that have been resuscitated in the past 40 years all had a mystical experience that either they may have stuffed down or that they attributed it to drugs or
Right,
some
right.
other altered state, and they didn't take it seriously. But he says that this change that we're going through right now is going to be the tipping point. What, have you heard anything like that, where if you think the past 40 years, how everyone right away when they went into the hospital, it was automatic, try to bring them back. What do you think about that?
Oh, I think that's quite feasible. I mean, I think we are seeing a shift, and you know, for me, I work more in the world of the data. And what's really interesting is I think it was just yesterday the Pew Research Center came out with a report on, of all things, people who've had contact with deceased relatives.
Yeah.
And I don't know that we would have ever seen this in the past. And they found that 44% of Americans, 44% reported having one in the past year.
Oh,
And it
so
was even higher. I think it was 53% reported at some point in their lifetime. And that is, half of our population
wow.
almost in 1 year, and certainly half in their lifetime. And they're openly talking about this. So, and my suspicion is it may be even higher than that, because we know predominantly women are reporting this. They seem to be more open to it. We don't know if they're just more receptive to it or if they're willing to share. And I think, that is sort of a turning point, that we keep seeing signaling. The younger people are much more open to this. We keep, in every study we keep seeing that people endorse less religion. Like they say they're not as religious, and yet they endorse more spirituality. And I think we need to dig deeper there and sort of see what do they mean by that. Um, and and so, it is really, it feels to me like, that there's data to support what you're saying. And it's really exciting, because I think the world really needs it right now.
Oh, I think it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Where one of during the lockdown, one of the online events for IANDS, which is the International Association for Near Death Studies, for those that can't understand my speaking, my accent. Well, no, sometimes people go IONS, which is
Yeah.
IONS, and nope, it's IANDS.
Right.
Anyway, what we have really focused on, you don't really die, you're not alone. And what's so exciting is that you're coming up with proof of that, which is very amazing. Now, do you know anything about Sonia Rinaldi?
No.
Okay, Sonia Rinaldi is I think she's from Argentina or Brazil, and she is a researcher and she has helped, I don't know, thousands of people, women and parents, actually try to contact with their past children.
Okay. Yes, I have heard of that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. And she does sound, so she has it set up that they can actually speak to her.
Mhm.
So she has a device that has syllables in it, and from the other side, they can
Okay.
activate it, as well as she's now doing these images that come out very clear. It's quite remarkable. And then she has a documentary called Rinaldi, if you want
Mhm.
to see it. And then there's also a device that's in production called the Soul Phone.
Hmm.
That is a device that is a way to actually call somebody up from the other side. So these things are real. They're not science fiction. technology is really helping bridge the gap that maybe our minds can't even capture.
And again, I am a clinician, and so I focus on the impact on the individual. And I have seen this help people with their grieving when they are, in a place and that they've lost a loved one. We are working now on looking at some data that was funded by a BL Research grant given to some of my colleagues, David Lorimer, Callum Cooper, Chris Rowe, Evelyn Elsier. And the data is about people who report after death communications. We broke it down into those who reported encounters with deceased partners or spouses, because we know it happens at higher rates there. And really, it's just profound, the impact that these communications have. They seem to be almost overwhelmingly positive for the individual who experiences them. And the influence is really profound on impacting their grief, their ability to, they don't necessarily the goal is not to forget the person and move on. It's more about understanding that maybe there's still a connection. And certainly what we see in the data is that people endorse that this is a very, very positive. And what was brought up in the Pew research, and we found the same, which was interesting, is that it seems to happen in people who also report that they are sort of moderately religious. So not so much in the very, very, very people who endorse very, very, very religious or not religious at all. And so that's sort of an interesting component as well that we want to explore a little further.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, and that's what it's so interesting, the research that shows all these different near-death experiences. PMH Atwater wrote a book, I think it's called The Bible of near-death experiences. And she's told me in an interview that she gave the copyright to IANDS as a fundraiser. And it's like this big old phone book.
Yeah.
Where she's categorized different types. And I find it fascinating. What I find fascinating, because I haven't had a near-death experience, but I've had spiritually transformative experiences, is that the articulation of it. At first, people don't say anything because they're afraid of the ramifications of letting people know that. But the integration of that different view of life is quite difficult without processing. So have you found that that's what your focus is a lot on how to assist these people to integrate that spiritual experience and embrace it rather than discard it?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because what I have found is most people embrace it. You don't have to, they're not rejecting it typically. It's more that they are a bit cautious in disclosing. And so sometimes they may have disclosed and really been shut down or made fun of or told that that's, someone's tried to explain it to them in a different way. And so and some people are fearful of that and think, well, that I won't share because that I may be judged this way. Right. So that's what I find is more common. Often when people have disclosed either in my professional work with them, clinically or through a research study, they often tell me, you're the first person I've ever told this.
Yeah.
And so I think trying to normalize it, trying to get it out in the media, that even if we don't know how to explain it, and that's, I'm not saying I understand it. I think it's important to say it is happening. And I will tell you a really meaningful story for me was I was giving more of a public lecture. So I do a lot of professional lectures. I think it's really important for researchers to also present to the community. So this was a community presentation on after-death communications and an introduction to DOPS in general, to the Division of Perceptual Studies. And during the question and answer segment, a woman who was there alone stood up, and she was in tears. And she said, "Thank you so much for sharing these stories, because I thought I was going crazy."
Yeah.
She had been receiving what she perceived were communications from her deceased husband and not shared them, didn't know what was going on. And to me, that is a shame if we are not getting our word out there enough to let people understand. This seems to be, as best we can tell, a natural part of life, of being human.
Yeah.
And whether we can explain it or not, it seems that, a good majority of us are, or at least half of us by the Pew Research, are having these experiences, and we need to know that, and that most of them are very positive and reassuring, and there are the occasional ones that are not. What I have typically found is, at least in my experience, many of those unpleasant experiences are simply because the person, it doesn't have a context within which to put this.
Right.
So like this woman, they think they're crazy. They're afraid to tell anyone. They might think they're losing their mind. Something's going on. And so I think just being able to spread the word that this is more common than one might think, and it's okay to talk about it. And training our clinicians, our medical doctors, our counselors, how to handle this when it does happen. And at our division, we're really actively doing that. Researcher Marietta Pelavanova is actively sort of engaging our doctors, the ones that might, cardiologists, surgeons, the ones who may be more likely to encounter people with near-death experiences, and explaining to them about that. I think we need to do the same with after-death communications. So I've been really trying to educate people in our oncology program, newer doctors as they come through their training. I think it's so important. And I realized you had asked a question about being a woman in this research. When I joined DOPS, I was the only female faculty member, and the first, I think, in like their history. We now, I'm proud to say, have there are three of us, so
Okay.
we're growing, and I think that is a positive thing. I think the research that's been done to date is really strong and excellent, and I think having females join adds another dimension,
Right.
and I'm happy to say that that's expanding.
So you're saying that and this is wonderful. Thank you. And I was cheering in the background because I was in corporate America before I started my
Yeah.
and I know what that means.
Yeah.
So it's not lip service, but it is. You have to be smarter than everyone else. Are you familiar with Dr. Or she was Colonel Diane Corcoran, who was a past president of IANDS? Are you familiar with her work?
I'm not.
Well, she passed this year, and there'll be a memorial for her at the event, but she was a nurse in the Army in Vietnam.
Wow.
And she was exposed for the first time to people, young men coming in and having near-death experiences. And she was convinced, so this is starting to feed into the medical industry and psychology and psychiatry, where she was saying that a lot of the PTSD designations that are given to people are misdiagnosed, and they really had near-death experiences. And she attributed a lot of the military veterans' suicides to being misdiagnosed. Have you heard anything about that?
Wow. I have not. It wouldn't surprise me. I think in that case, the diagnosis, again, with the reluctance to share or the sort of inability to really describe, um, and then not being supported, not having that elicited in a supportive way, could further traumatize
Right.
anyone who goes through that experience, for
Well,
sure.
they come back as different people. They
Yeah.
go in, especially in the military, they go in as macho, gonna
Mhm.
go and fight everybody, and they come back in love with everything. And
Yeah.
so your spiritual inclination is almost it's so strange to their wives, their family,
Mhm.
because it's not the same person they knew. And so it causes all sorts of unrest in the relationships, so they're even more abandoned, if you want to say. And
Yeah.
then she said if they were diagnosed and given the drugs that are usually given to PTSD, that was the exact wrong diagnosis
Yeah.
to give
I
them.
mean, it's so challenging, because, of course, you could be diagnosed with both. You can have
Yeah,
active PTSD and have had a near-death experience, and it would be very important to sort of tease that out. Absolutely, absolutely.
yeah. So
Um,
that was her thing. And in many past IANDS events at our conferences, they've held classes teaching nurses
mhm,
about
mhm.
near-death experiences so that they knew what it was, they could identify it,
I think
and
that's
they could help support. So I think your work goes hand in hand. I'd be glad to introduce you to some of the people that are carrying that forward when we're there next week.
I would love that. I would
Yeah,
love that. I think it goes right to the core of my message that we need to spread this, to increase awareness, so that, again, we don't have widows experiencing things alone, feeling like they're going crazy. So they know there is a community, and that's what I do with all these folks, is really help educate them and point them in the direction where they can get resources like IANDS, and realize they're not alone,
right,
because that is what's going to help them as well.
right.
It's so important, and I'm so grateful for the work that IANDS does.
Uh, well, I also wanted to ask about spirituality versus religion,
Yeah,
because religion usually has the construct where you go through an intermediary to get to your mystical relationship with God, and most religions have that, and then the spirituality is direct, in my knowing, is a
mhm,
direct connection to source, God, which may be almost like a sixth sense, where
mm.
you have a whole different, it's almost like an expanded view of reality. And how because you have a lot of experience with these two, integrating these two concepts, and I'm wondering how does that work, or do I have the wrong idea?
It's a really, we could do several hour podcast on this, and I think you're right. Some religions, there is a intermediary, certainly something like the Catholic priest that's sort of in between you and God. Some religions were developed specifically to avoid that intermediary. So I think of John Wesley and Martin Luther and people like that. And I think the way I've conceived it and seen it sort of on the ground in the people I'm interacting with, the patients and the research participants, I would have to say that what I see is people feeling less affiliated with a formal religion.
Ah,
So they are not attending a church. They're not tithing to a church. They may go to Catholic Mass at Christmas, or they might go to their Protestant church for Easter. That's sort of it. They don't feel that connected. They're not in a community. They would call themselves spiritual because they still have a belief system in something bigger than themselves. So these are people who may say, yes, I believe in science. I am also spiritual. And my spirituality sort of is right there alongside my belief in the scientific method. And they're not agnostic necessarily. They're not atheist. They would call themselves spiritual. And many of them, again, thinking of the people I've interacted with, my participants in research studies, my patients, are familiar with a formalized religion and may have been brought up that way. They're not participating in that now.
I see.
However, that does sometimes inform their spirituality. Sometimes their spirituality is sort of their own, what they've developed on their own in their belief system. Sometimes it's through the use of meditation, mindfulness practices, other contemplative practices. Increasingly, I see people accessing that spirituality and their connection with it through psychedelic drugs, sort of consciousness altering drugs that are more and more accessible. So, we need a study that really helps us explore what exactly people mean by that. Because what I've given you is my observation. It is by no means a published study with data. So I think it's a really good question, because more and more we do see when people are asked that they're endorsing spirituality and not necessarily being religious.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're in a very interesting time where everyone's questioning what's true.
Yeah.
And where I call it the inverted matrix, where the truth is intermixed with falsehood. So you're trying to sort it out. And so I just wondered about the lockdown caused people to really consider that this invisible enemy could end their days here. And, what did they really care about, and what was really the purpose of being here? And it may have caused a lot of people to clean up their stuff a lot. But I'm wondering what you think about the difference between, in your studies, about out-of-body experience and near death, and basically the meditation. I mean, there's so many different aspects, because there's you said about someone's point of view. I believe there's 8 billion different points of view. And I think that's what consciousness wanted. It's a giant database in the cosmos, and it's hoping that each one of us does our part to bring in data. So it's a giant computer or something. But could you talk about out-of-body experiences, or some of those paranormal, or I don't know what you call that, paranormal, or?
Well, it's interesting, and we've recently hired a researcher, a female researcher who's specializing in out-of-body experiences. Wow. And she has a big study that she's running in Brazil, because in that culture, it is much more common, and people actually go to schools where they can learn to do this. Many people in America don't know that. So it's really interesting. Some cultures are different than ours and much more accepting of this. And she's looking at it in a very scientific way, really looking at what is happening in the brain, what are people reporting. And these are people that can do this volitionally, so they can do it on their own in a research lab setting. So we'll see. She's just starting that research. What I think is interesting about the out-of-body experience is it's a beautiful example of how we are not our bodies, how whatever we call we, our consciousness, our soul, our personality, it exists outside of this package, and that the out of body experience, I mean, think about it. You can access it through a near death experience. You can access it accidentally,
Yep.
like coming out of sleep or something. You can access it through deep meditation. You can access it in psychedelic drugs pretty routinely. I mean, routinely. So we have this ability, whatever it is, whatever you want to call it, whether you believe in it or not, it's happening. People are reporting it. And so, studying it only in near-death experiences, yes, it's affiliated with that, but that's challenging because, of course, you can't, that's a little more difficult to study. You can't randomize and have people, have a near-death experience or anything. So I think my colleague, her name's Marina Wheeler, and she's on to something with, exploring people who can do this on purpose in a controlled way and really exploring what is exactly happening, and studying that a little more distinctly. I think that's going to be an enormous line of research in the future to help us better understand that relationship between our physical body and whatever is happening when we have this out of body experience.
Right. Well, I believe that only part of the giant you is in this physical body. So I think a lot of highly sensitive people like me are out a lot. Out.
Yeah, you may be right. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's time now to be in. I do want to ask you about the concept about using these microdosing of drugs. I did publish a book by Daniel McQueen that was called Psychedelic Cannabis, and he is a psychologist or psychiatrist. He has the certifications, and he created a sitters school here in Boulder, Colorado, where he trains people. And the reason why he was using cannabis is that if people have somatic experiences, they can use CBD to reduce the intensity of the drug, so that they don't have discomfort, or they don't have a lot of problems afterwards. Yeah. But I'm seeing it being trendy for the microdosing, and this is 40-year-olds on down that I don't know how you feel about it, but it kind of concerns me. I mean, I don't know. Like, what do you think about the microdosing and the use of psychedelics, mushrooms, or people are using mushrooms every day?
Yeah. I think, and I'm certainly not an expert in that arena. I did come through the program that they have there, the Integrated Psychiatric Institute out of Boulder.
Uh-huh.
I did the 10-month course on becoming a psychedelic assisted psychotherapist.
Okay, so you know what I'm talking about.
Because of so many of my patients are asking for it, and or asking about it. And I was really made acutely aware of the concerns you're talking about when I was out there in Boulder for some of this training, and my Uber driver or Lyft driver, was talking to me from the airport to my hotel and asked about what I was there for. I told them, and they immediately say, "Oh, can you get me some good stuff?"
Oh, no.
And so he went on to explain the abuse of ketamine, of mushrooms, or other, and I think really we have to remember that what we've discovered is not new. Number one, people have been using mind-altering substances since, way before us, way back to the Greeks and Romans, and it was always in the context of, of a very supported, integrated sort of cultural belief system. And so what we're doing is, and I not that I dismiss all psychedelic use. I think it can be very therapeutic in the right approach. I do think we run the risk, though, when we pull it out of a context, a cultural context, a spiritual context, and make it available to people. There is always the risk for abuse. Having worked for many years in addiction, I see that, and so I think we just have to proceed with caution. And what I would love to see is a culture that continues to support this idea of contemplative practices, of what are we trying to reach? We're trying to reach this other way of understanding, this sort of view that we obtain when we have a near-death experience, or we meditate for a long time, and learn strategies to sort of alter our consciousness. We know that that can be a very beneficial thing for ourselves, our health, our well-being, for the people around us, including the planet, other sentient creatures. We're much, the research shows over and over again. And I am also aware, on the flip side, that some people may not be able to get to that state of consciousness without a psychedelic. In my training, that became apparent to me. I went in sort of skeptical, like having done meditation for so long and doing meditation research. I was thinking, well, we can achieve the same state through meditation, through yogic practices, holotropic breathing. And yes, we can. And I think the researchers and clinicians in that program and in the field of psychedelic research in general have helped me see that maybe there are people that can't use those tools and successfully access that altered state of consciousness, and that for them these sort of careful use of psychedelics may be helpful.
Right.
And again, in a structured approach, not sort of on their own, doing it every day. I think the most recent research I actually read about microdosing was that it really didn't seem to have an impact. There may be more current data now. So that's, I think it's very complicated. And I very rarely like to, I like my foot in both camps, and very rarely is the answer so clean cut.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to urge people that are listening that if you are interested in going deep like this, to have a professional assist you. The ancient cultures had a shaman that guided them through these kind of plant medicine trips, and it's shadow work. So it's something that you would want assistance and not left to your own.
Absolutely.
Oh my
Absolutely. In most cultures, it is a very big buildup, a long preparation, sometimes a year-long preparation, and deep work and support from those who understand, going through this. So this is just one piece of it. And certainly, yes, I would completely agree with you that this is not something to be taken lightly or to do on your own or as a way to party. No.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to sound like my parents. Like that's what people were saying about marijuana back in the past. But I mean, Colorado has even legalized, I think, psilocybin mushrooms now for medical. And marijuana created a whole nother industry to actually, to the medical marijuana industry as a pain relief, created a way to actually categorize and figure out dosages. Yeah. So that's all, it's all progress, but it's also can be, everything's a two-edged sword on all of this. So I just wondered, and I wondered if there was any study about the out-of-body work with this assistance from the psychedelics if that had been the case. But I don't want to really go there either because I don't have experience. I don't really have experience. But I do think that it is time for all of us to look at our projections that we project on others as we're learning about the way to live in the world, in a peaceful, loving world. That so much of what we see in others that we don't like is really part of us, or we think we're hiding it from everyone else, but oops.
Yeah.
So have you seen positive things happen in the past 3 years with your work and with after the lockdown?
Oh gosh, yeah. I've there's a huge opportunity, I think, to work with people after this lockdown. One of the things that came to mind for me immediately was so many people died unexpectedly, sometimes pretty dramatically and quickly, and left behind. There's estimates that for every person that died from COVID, there are at least 9 people grieving that person.
Wow.
And so the work that we're doing, the work that IANDS is doing, is so important because we just had a mass experience of loss, and we have a huge number of people worldwide grieving, and that always existed. It was just sort of highlighted by COVID. So to me, the work we're doing was just underscored as how important it is. How many more people now may have the potential for an after-death communication? How many of our COVID victims had near-death experiences and are still alive to tell about it? How many shared death experiences, which we haven't talked about, were there? People impacted that way, people trying to deal with their grief. And, I don't think it's a coincidence that we saw an increase in some of these usage and the sort of the legislation on psychedelics as that grows and expands. And we're living in an era, sorry, not an area, of potentially increased fear and also potentially increased wisdom and insight and expansion. And I think if we can tilt towards that, we've got a really good chance of large, massive shifts happening for the positive.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think that our use of the internet is training wheels for being telepathic. And for us to be telepathic, we have to clean up our stuff because that's the first step. And I know in some of the ancient myths, they talked about 2 Earths, where some people will be in 5D Earth and 3D Earth, but everyone gets a chance to evolve. So I love what you're doing. I love that you're bridging the gap from people that are only left brain and only interested in the material world, that they're actually getting to get scientific proof that's different than quantum physics. This is a different type of science, right?
Right. And that's the other thing that happened during the pandemic. I have to say, I was fortunate enough that my adult daughter moved back home instead of continuing to live in DC in a tiny apartment when she was told to work from home. And we were able to write a book about a lot of this. And she has trained in yoga. She's a yoga instructor. She's done mindfulness practices since she was instructed as a child. She's in graduate school now for psychology. and it was a wonderful time to be living together. We had always talked about doing this, and we were able to do it and get it published in 2020. So
Cool.
I feel fortunate about that. Yeah.
Are you going to show it to us?
I can certainly do that.
Please.
It's right here. So I am a Gen X, proudly Gen X, and my daughter is a millennial. So we decided to write this from both perspectives. So it's living mindfully across the lifespan, an intergenerational guide. So that's the
Wonderful.
intergenerational piece. And we have been asked if this is sort of a magic mushroom tree. It's just a beautiful tree. So no, there's no allusion to that. We do, however, weave exactly what I was talking about. We weave the science of psychology and yoga, the physiology, with then stories, both personal stories and stories from people we've worked with, clients, patients. And it goes really in order of the life cycle. So the first is about birth and youth and sort of things like self-esteem, and we give some information about, for instance, did you know for girls, their self-esteem, women, girls, it is its highest at age 9.
Oh my gosh.
And drops from there.
Oh my gosh.
Which is just really, so we talk a lot about what to do about that. And Morgan, my daughter, has in here also movements, so body-based things that you can do. I give psychological exercises. It's easy to read. And the last chapter goes all the way through. So the last chapter is about death and dying. And it's called So Long for Now, ? And we talk about near-death experiences, fear of death and dying, out-of-body experiences. So throughout, you have the sort of science-based psychology components, and you have woven into it, here's also science with some outcomes that you might not have read about. Perfect. And some ideas that you may not have thought about. And it's been very, very well received. We have, interestingly enough, some people are using it as a textbook. I'm doing a book clubs with it, and so it's been really fun to have that and truly integrate. I think that's what we need to access people who may not otherwise pick up a book on near-death experiences. They may pick up a book saying, "Oh, I'd like to live mindfully. That sounds interesting." And lo and behold, they get it sneaked in. It's like sneaking your vegetables in to your dinner. I've always put carrots in my tomato sauce for that reason.
Me too, but not always appreciated, I guess, by my audience. But I wanted to show, last but not least, I wanted to show the IANDS conference site, because you'll be speaking there coming up soon. And this is the site. It's conference.iands.org. And oops, I did that again. Excuse me a second. That keeps happening. Let me do this again. I don't know why my mouse, I keep hitting it wrong, but actually let's just talk instead. Sure. The IANDS event is in Virginia near Washington, D.C. this year, and it's the biggest conference we've ever had. IANDS is, I think, on its 42nd year, so it's over 40 years of research and amazing camaraderie. I can't speak today.
Camaraderie, yes.
Thank you. And
fellowship, right?
Fellowship, but the opportunity to process and learn more about all the opportunities that you have to grow and be a contributor to this new era and turn this boat around to love and peace and kindness. But it comes from an inside job, which is what Kim is talking about. Is all of her work is about teaching you how to have your inside job figured out so that you can participate in a loving way in humanity, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Loving towards yourself. It's got to start there. And that allows you then to connect. I think when we realize that interconnectedness, and I've seen people realize it through all the varieties that we've talked about, these different experiences that happen spontaneously, or a near-death experience or an after-death communication, there is a shift. I mean, it's almost like you see a light bulb going off over their head that, oh, there's something more.
Right.
It's that openness. And I think that's where we need to be right now, to realize that maybe the scientific approach that we have been indoctrinated to is certainly true, but not all that there is.
Right. That's perfect. That's perfect. Well, what is the best place for people to get a hold of you? I know you do have a profile on LinkedIn, but is there another place that you'd like people to connect with you so that they can learn more and follow your work?
Well, certainly. I'm sorry, the phone is ringing and I can't run to get it. Um, the website with the Division of Perceptual Studies at UVA is really going to be one of the best ways to reach out to me. There's someone monitoring that all the time. And I think having your audience explore that would be wonderful. There's so much information, not just about me, other researchers that we have. And I would just encourage you to explore that site and, fill out the forms. There are questionnaires if you've had experiences. And I'll be at IANDS. I'd be happy to see anyone there, speak with you. I really am looking forward to it.
Oh, yes. I think once you go, you're going to want to always go. That's
Well,
what
it's been virtual, partly, virtual, and it's so nice to have things really all in person, and or at least that ability. Yeah.
Well, I started 6 years ago and I haven't missed one yet, even with virtual or not virtual,
Awesome.
because once you have this experience of being back at home, it almost feels like source.
Yeah.
There's so many people that have touched their knowing and are trying to live from that knowing, that it's quite a group of, it's quite an opportunity. So to remember who we really are. So thank you so much. I look forward to meeting you in person and giving you a hug in person.
Oh, yes,
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I love what you're doing. I can't wait to hear more about it, because it really is the time to bridge the gap of science and spirituality now, and make this an empowerment opportunity for everyone.
I agree. And thank you, Kathy, for the work you're doing.
Oh, sure.
Helping spread the word.
I'm learning. Every person I get to talk to, I learn something new. So thank you, Kim.
Thank you. Be well.
You
Bye-bye.
too.